I would like to begin with saying that, of course, it's an enormous challenge to talk after all these speakers, and also I didn't have time to run and change my presentation after all's been said about STS and business in particular, so I'll go along with what I have, and so I'll try to offer some reflections about the same question about what does STS mean for business and technological development, and I will offer some kind of a personal story of doing STS, researching in an STS sort of discipline. And I would like to begin by saying that there are no easy answers in my view. It probably reiterates what's been said already. And my response and reflections will be informed by ideas about the kind of STS we are talking about and each of us practices. In my talk, I will offer my personal perspective about what my version of STS does or mean in conversations with other areas of research and practice, such as market studies, management education, and technology policy. I'm based in a business school like Steve, and I also I have to be able to talk to those who are on both sides of kind of research into business, both practically and academically. So, a version of STS I would subscribe for could probably be summarized in terms of approaching science and policy as culture and practice, which is kind of getting inspiration from, for example, laboratory life. And it is about understanding the production of scientific facts, for example, through analysis of scientific controversies, and examining the contingencies of technological outcomes, rather than taking them for granted. Such version of STS also assumes research in collaboration with participants in science, business, and policy. To mention briefly my research interests, they have recently been revolving around interactions at the university industry and policy interface, around emerging technologies, for example, nano. I have also become interested in responsible innovation in the transnational contexts, which may become my next larger project. And through ethnographic engagement with business and policy practitioners, I have contributed to such developing streams increasingly being informed by STS as market studies, by sort of analyzing knowledge and technology transfer in practice, and interpretive policy analysis in collaboration with colleagues in the European Institutions of Technology Assessment, or TA. In my research, I'm trying to think about how to meet the opportunities and address the challenges of emerging technologies, such as nano-synthetic biology, human enhancement, or NBIC convergence, nano-bio-info-cogno convergence. Both researchers and practitioners in emerging technologies recognize that substance of the new sciences and technologies is in flux. We can also observe and in many ways participate in the co-emergence of what the French philosopher Michel Foucault would call subject positions and institutional identities as players in, for example, nano. There are also plenty of proposed and criticized ideas about local and global governance, including issues around achieving impact and societal relevance of emerging technologies. Notions of responsibility and accountability are established and contested, as well as terms of success. So the world of emerging technologies is also characterized by the promissory rhetoric and future-looking statements. As in this example of an article published by The Guardian in 2009, consultants and media participate in sustaining claims about nano as a new industrial revolution. Tim Harper, an owner of a consultancy firm, is asserting that the global market for nanotechnologies will reach $12 trillion in a couple of months from now. However, all sorts of questions can be asked from STS perspectives. Who is counting? Why and how? What counts as the global market? What is the role of media in the propagation of such claims? If we are to address the challenges posed by emerging technologies, both in research and practice, I suggest we need to inform both research and practice by insights coming from science and technology studies. Further in my presentation, I will consider three areas where conversations happen about redefining the ways in which we address these challenges. Namely, I will talk about market studies and corporate ethnography, which can be seen as a critical response to a simplified textbook version of capitalism, often transported from the West to the rest. I will also briefly mention my teaching experience joining the cultural turn in management education And finally, we'll talk about the reflexive turn in science and technology policy, and in particular, interactions between STS and technology assessment. Market studies is a mostly European attempt, to a large extent inspired by the works of Michel Calon, to re-examine markets as socio-material assemblages and discursive resources. This book, Reconnecting Marketing to Markets, is one of the most recent collective publications addressing issues around the construction of markets by experimenting with the STS vocabulary of materiality and analytical tools to address the practices of knowledge production and technological matters involved in the shaping and performativity of markets. My contribution to this growing area is an outcome of my ethnographic study in a global telecommunication corporation between 2002 and 2005. Researching high-tech marketing in practice and in conversations with colleagues, in my thesis I used the idea of tellable stories to analyze how marketing managers produce credible narratives or stories about technologies, such as press releases or for the purposes of product launch. It seems that the concept is now getting the life of its own. Imagine my surprise when one day I received an email from a person I did not know, addressing also my co-author Daniel Nayland. Elena and Daniel, we don't know each other. I'm an anthropologist here at Intel, where I spend my time translating theory and the occasional stint of research into product design and market strategy decisions. I don't make it a habit to send fan mail, but I wanted to let you know that your paper on tellable stories and constituencies in technology firms has been making the rounds here, and the consensus seems to be something of the order of, yeah, that's exactly how it works. The tellability of stories and whose constituencies are whose are a central, dominant preoccupation you've captured with unnerving accuracy. I have no idea whether you'd be excited or appalled that your work is circulating in this way, but in any case, figured you'd rather know. Best D. And I found it curious, of course, that they read Zinoviev, who is a Russian dissident at Intel. For an anthropologist like myself, getting a fan mail from the natives saying that the portrayal of their culture is true raises all sorts of equally unnerving questions about the possible loss of the critical distance. However, the relieving thought was the note was sent by the anthropologist in Intel. My next brief topic is a view from an international business school at Exeter about management education. At Exeter, STS has been taken up in management education in the context of globalization. I'm co-teaching topics about technology users and users, the internet, as well as introduction to corporate anthropology in the International Management and Globalization, which is second year undergraduate module. I also teach a module which is called Internet Marketing in the Information Society as an elective. Both have this as their central elements, an exploration of technological cultures that we do together with the future managers. Although the students quickly become skilled in employing such theories in reinforcing their coursework, they quickly realize that rigid cultural theories labeling, if not stigmatizing, cultures do not really work as basis for decision making. What they could have said in the next stages of their exploration, taking the STS ideas on board, is that theories of cultures and technological cultures in particular, in Michel Calon's and Donald Mackenzie's terms, are performative as part of, for example, international business consultancy discourse. They also recognize the need to engage with local practices and learn to work in the multicultural environments. In many ways, this kind of approach to training new generation of managers gives students the opportunity to explore the anthropological way of thinking about doing business and understanding technological change, also appreciating the interactional complexities involved, making the business enterprise less of an expansion, but an exercise in mutual cultural learning. Well, the third topic I would like to talk about concerns the reflexive turn in science and technology policy. This is an exciting area in which STS scholars participate in projects and international academic policy networks, as well as through editorial projects. Increasingly in science and technology policy, governance is understood as a deliberative, multi-stakeholder process in which STS helps to rethink dominant assumptions more and more in collaboration with policy and business practitioners, for which various venues and conferences have been actively established, such as SNET. To give you a flavor of some of the ongoing debates, issues collectively addressed include questioning the linear model of innovation, collaboration, impact of technologies and their societal relevance as policy metaphors, debating what constitutes an emerging field such as nano, and understanding the politics of legitimation of particular approaches in science and technology policy, and the implications for funding and governance decisions, project trajectories, and individual scientists' careers. In these projects and conferences, streams of inquiry talk to each other in tackling the difficult questions concerning emerging technologies. The dialogue between STS and technology assessment has become an especially fruitful way to examine the roles of both STS and TA in technological change through participating in, for example, mobilizing and mutual learning action plans or European projects such as the FP7's EPOC project on the governance of ethically controversial emerging technologies. The project examines and in case of human enhancement, in that case, whereby STS scholars work together with social corporate responsibility scholars, and hopefully there will be input from social studies of finance to resolve issues around ethics concerning these technologies. As another example of creating spaces for conversation, I would also like to mention the recent Exeter workshop about societal impacts of emerging technologies. The goal was to bring together scientists, social scientists, policymakers, technology assessment researchers, but not in order for an agreement to be reached, but to offer an opportunity for an international and multidisciplinary academic practitioner debate. In conclusion, what does STS mean for business and for technological development? My inroad into the topic was through offering a take on the current debates around the construction of emerging technologies. These efforts to analyze and find new ways of constructing emerging technologies as subject to regulation call for re-examination of dominant assumptions about innovation, knowledge, and technology in policy. This is, I assert, where STS can and does make a difference. Participating in these deliberations, STS, however, is not immune from self-reflection. Given the complexities involved in interactions, including, for instance, contingencies of access and non-disclosure, STS cannot be seen as simply an attempt at a truthful and objective description of corporate, scientific, and policy realities, but is more of an entanglement in the ongoing debates with an ambition to inform, if not radically transform, such debates. Thank you.
Елена was applying that to her endeavor in marketing and business world. To what extent then do you see the role of STS when it means business, basically taking the business world, which frequently takes things for granted, basically hammering down on the head with questions we don't usually ask?
Well, I think it's become not such a uncommon term and topic in debates about science and technology development. There are all sorts of reflexive turns these days, and the one I spoke about is probably just one of instantiations of the conversations that are taking place when in front of the kind of challenges of the world is posing, and especially for policymakers and science and technology studies researchers. So it's become a very practical issue to get together and re-examine what we've been doing for a long time.
I'm a bit surprised. I didn't think we were going to be allowed to use the R word. Because the R word is sort of banned here, and I don't want to elevate the R word to a sort of major principle in any way, but I just think it's one of those several sensibilities that I listed, which I think are important in doing STS or thinking about STS. And so I'm a bit depressed at the idea that reflexivity is a battering ram. It's meant more to be a gentle reminder when we get too pretentious about our own confidence in our results and our declamations and findings and so on. So you can do a nice analysis of those instances where STS seems to have been taken up in situations outside of STS. And it's very tempting at that point to say, well, it must have been really good work. because these people have adopted and used this work to great fruition. But it's strange, isn't it? But that's never how we talk about technology take-up when we're doing STS ourselves. We do not say that the intrinsic features of the technology led to its take-up. So why would we say that the intrinsic features of our own arguments lead to the take-up? It's much more interesting than that. It's not essentialist and determinist like that. It's about managing these relationships across sometimes quite obdurate organisational boundaries. And it's about managing that relationship along and down the curve in the certainty trough. I'm not sure if that entirely answers your question, Ole, but I hope I've avoided it sufficiently.
Once again, I'll explain my didactic game. We discussed the work in our seminar and facility with people, so I wanted to hear from the originator. Even though we don't pronounce it anymore, so our translator couldn't even get it. Translator. Now, on to questions or discussion from the audience. It seems that
everyone's convinced.
And the questions from students, once again, the Shaitis was in English, I'll translate it into English. Если есть вопросы из аудитории, то хочу задать по-русски, то я перейду туда. Олег Енисарский.
Олег, да. Если уж речь идет о языке антропологии или этнографии, мне хочется спросить, как вы относитесь к теме поколенчества? Поколение там случайно STS.
How do you treat
Потому что я...
generation and the generation of STS? There is a generation of STS.
I don't understand that second.
You were talking about...
Смотрите, я очень хорошо помню, как на сцене нашей российской науки и жизни появился кибернетика в лице Лекториума.
I just remember, I'm old enough to remember how cybernetics appeared in the Russian science scene, and everybody was doing cybernetics. Isn't STS a kind of movement like cybernetics at some point? And everything was interpreted as a we applied it everywhere.
Которые были сначала в кибернетике, волна это спала, но и дальше в качестве объекта такого энтузиазма стал системный подход.
Yeah, and then after the cybernetics, when all the ideological reaction around it was gone, actually the next fashion was systems approach, and then everything became systems approach.
То есть и так далее. То есть каждый раз появляются такие волны некоторых поколений, которые потом, в общем, мирно уживаются, потому что они уже не в зоне энтузиазма.
So we live in this kind of world of waves of theoretical fashion, cybernetics and systems theory and STS.
I understand the point.
Масса аллюзий, которые здесь была, так сказать, психоделика, там, искусство, и так далее, они очень понятны, как близки и ясны. Когда говорится о том, что, в общем-то, в значительной степени это СТС укоренено, так сказать, во времени определенном, и вот своей поколенческой идентичности.
I hear lots of allusions to the specific era in history, like psychedelia, music. It's all more or less the 60s, which I remember well. So it's the 60s generation.
Yes. No, if you really lived in the 60s, you do not remember it. It's well known. Let me talk about. I think the parallel between STS and cybernetics is not a good one, because cybernetics became, in my understanding, so institutionalized that it became very rigid and inflexible, and that was its downfall. Similarly, I think if STS ever reaches a stage where there are canonical ways of doing it, that everyone agrees there is consensus about the best methods and approaches, then we are in trouble. It seems to me that what's so interesting about STS is it is a multidiscipline of different kinds of approaches which disagree with each other and which are constantly renewing themselves. So I'm very clear that 5-10 years ago I would not have put quite so much emphasis on these kinds of issues in terms of reflexive ethnography and so on. I think what's interesting about STS is there is a continual movement, and we never display it very much when we sort of appear on these occasions, but there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of argument, and I think that's very healthy indeed. Can I come to your first point? The difference between anthropology and ethnography, is that right? Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Ну, кстати, второе дыхание кибернетики в виде киберпанка, так сказать, идет победный марш.
Oleg thinks that actually the second breath in the movement of cybernetics in the form of cyberpunk is actually developing pretty fast, and it's not very rigid, at least in this country.
Okay, so cybernetics is not in trouble.
Well, and of course there's a book by Andy. Okay, Trevor has a question.
Well, there was a question. It was just a reflection that recently I've been working on a project that's very similar to Steve in terms of the topic. We're both interested in internet product reviews, like product reviews at Amazon.com, these things that are highly ranked and all over the internet. And it's interesting because we both ended up, Steve and I, with websites that are kind of interactive, but they're interestingly different. The sort of research we've done has been very different. This probably, I think it speaks well to STS. My research, I got approached by an internet entrepreneur in Silicon Valley who read one of my earlier studies on the internet and said, well, I'd like to engage in a project with him studying these product reviews. So I did an internet survey of the top 1,000 product reviewers at Amazon.com, and it was more a traditional social science project pursued in a kind of realist way. We did a survey, we found out information about who were the sorts of people. We found interesting things, that a large number of these people were retirees that no one knew before. It was a surprise. So it was a kind of more traditional social science model of research, but we ended up putting our results on the internet with interactive forums for people to interact. And Steve's done something similar with this, and our two sites, I think, are linked together. And subsequently, I've had approaches from about 4 other companies who want to continue this collaboration, including Google. But I'm pursuing this not in this reflexive manner that Steve is. Maybe I should, but maybe this speaks to the field as a whole. We have just different approaches to how we deal with business as well. And we now have a big argument about which approach is the best one, maybe, which would be nice.
No, there's not an argument about it. Mine is much better. It is interesting. We've come across the same phenomenon. The website that I built with my collaborator is called How's My Feedback? And you can go to that website and rate the kinds of feedback that are given to a whole series of companies. So it's attempting to be a kind of meta rating site. And the experiment was to actually engage in developing this kind of business in order to get insights into what it takes to set up a website and to attract people to it, what counts as persuading them to be able to rate products and services, in this case, other websites and so on. And what we feel we've done is learn an awful lot about the business of rating websites and setting up websites as a result of engaging this from a kind of skeptical ethnographic point of view.
I just put a plug in. Our website's called How Aunt Annie, A-W-N-Y, gets a free lunch.me.
It's impossible to remember.
The Protestants use about Amazon, they call it Aunt Annie. That's one of the ethnographic things we've had.
I think you need a brand advisor, Trevor.
To put the discussion away from, Michelle, please.
Well, now I cannot resist the kind of provocation, which has to do with the distinctive features of being a knowledge producer in the context of a business school, which is by definition a highly interdisciplinary environment, right? I mean, if we think of all the types of interdisciplinarity that exists, certainly business schools are, where you have OB people coming together with psychologists, but you're also put, as you just described, in a position where you are also, consultant. So your research have as an outcome both, pursuing parallel careers as a consultant, at the same time rewards simultaneously. And typically, the pursuit of the rewards that drives academics is pure academic recognition for the kind of knowledge that. So I'm wondering to what extent the anti-disciplinary discourse that surrounds your knowledge production is not precisely connected to the fact that you're pursuing several rewards simultaneously, which means that the purely academic rewards are really relativized by this context. So this is really a truly reflexive. Now I'm really pushing reflexivity as much as one can push it in this kind of, but I cannot resist it. Why not?
It's very good. Take it further. Shall I?
Yes, please.
I think it's more multidisciplinary than interdisciplinary, actually, and that may be just a feature of the Oxford situation. But I think all my colleagues regard themselves as rapidly contributing to foundational issues in their disciplines while collaborating with each other at the same time. So that's fine. I don't think there is such a distinction between the academic life and the consultancy's life. Again, you could be right, and I can think of some of my colleagues for whom that is a big distinction and difference. And to the extent that some of them may think, why go after a research council grant when I can get money from a company to fund my research? My interest is different. My interest is what counts as doing consultancy. Why on earth does anyone take any notice of consultants? What is it about, the consultancy relationship? And it seems to me that's an intellectual puzzle, and one that I want to write about for academic colleagues as well as engage in as a proto-consultant. I mean, I don't think I'm a particularly successful consultant, but it seems to me it's a heaven-sent opportunity to try and figure out what are the dynamics of knowledge working outside of situations that we're most familiar with as academics.
There was a question I wanted to ask Steve, the co-author of Laboratory Life. There's some kind of mysterious story behind the disappearance of the word social from the title of Laboratory Life. It used to be social construction of scientific facts in 1979, and then it became a construction of social life. We know the story that is given by Lector, that social construction became so terrible and blah blah blah. The very word social construction should be blamed for everything that was wrong with constructivism. So that's why he says it's like a word of republic. If you put something in a republic word, if you put something in front of it, like Islamic Republic, People's Republic, it's getting only worse. So it's better to talk only about construction and not social construction. So one of the effects of STS, like in general level, philosophy, epistemology, and ontology of social work, was this skepticism about the social word. I don't want to ban it as we just banned reflexivity, that's our word and the S word. Social word, the very word social, became very problematic. And one of the tools strong statement was not to use social as a universal cause of all things in the universe. And this was kind of crusade against sociologism, including rehabilitation and zombification of Gabriel Tarver and stuff like that. So, but what we see now that within STS, the usage of word social is still as widespread as any other branch of sociology and sociological thinking. What happened to all this crusade against sociology? What happened to all these stories that we should not use word social as something that explains everything at the same moment? Is it something to do with the consultancy work maybe, because when you have to explain something to people who pay for this applied research, it's much easier to say that this is a social background of things that are going on, we discover them and happen. Is it has to do something with the relation with colleagues outside of STS that, okay guys, there are also sociologists, we just don't use the word social, but we are still there. So what's happened to all this philosophical attempt of revision of the whole agenda of sociology and removing the word social from this central position? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a lovely question. I mean, I'm tempted to say it was just a typo. A typo, you know, by mistake, social was left off. I absolutely understand the point. I completely agree, and did agree with Bruno at the time, that the social was becoming overblown. That is, if we start attributing everything to the social, you stop seeing everything in the round, and by giving agency to social entities as opposed to material entities, then you introduce a kind of skew to the whole the process. I'm more relaxed about, I think it's, with apologies, a sort of slightly French attitude to this. When you use the word social, you go to the guillotine. This kind of, and I don't go along with that particular. Every time you use the word social, you'll have your wrist slapped. No, I think the word social is useful in certain contexts, because the word social unlocks certain kinds and challenges certain kinds of assumption by people who are using essentialism and determinism without thinking. So you can introduce something else. You say there's something else going on, and for want of a different word, you might sometimes use the word social. Beyond, and I think it has it might have a value on a particular occasion of interacting with somebody where you figure out that broadening the conversation might benefit from the use of the word social. Ultimately, I don't think it's a very good term for the same reasons as Bruno. But it doesn't prevent me using it occasionally as a lever to say there's something else going on. I mean, I think social is terrible, but I'm not as fanatical about banning it as my famous French friend.
Okay. That's nice.
Помимо несомненно весомого аргумента про замыленность, есть, по-моему, более принципиальная вещь. Дело в том, что как раз находясь в рефлексивной позиции, мы используем открытый список предикатов, которыми обозначаются всякие целые, большие целости.
Можно остановиться, да. We're getting back to the topic of reflexivity. Apart from the fact that the term is overused and might have lost some of its meaning, what I wanted to stress is that it refers to a whole institution or process as a subject of what reflexivity applies to.
Причем список этот очень большой. Социальный, культурный, политический, экономический, этнографический.
And the list of these things you can designate as social, political, cultural, to what you apply reflexivity.
То, в принципе, можно, так сказать, в любых комбинациях употреблять ограниченный сток соображения благополучия. И получается из этого результат.
Oh, and now we're going to describe the term social as being just synonymous to all those things which we use for matters of style and convenience. Is there any purchase on using the word social, not using it, and its embellishment?
А результат того, что то целое, в рамках которого мы осуществляем свое мышление, свою деятельность, принципиально открытые вещи.
Well, this totality in which we do stage activities is a principally open thing, I guess, principally open to interpretation.
Когда возникает вопрос, за счет чего обеспечивается все-таки определенность пребывания в этом целом.
And the question is to what extent the definite character of being within this totality is ensured.
А обеспечивается она, согласно, благодаря активизму.
And it's established through the activism or activities.
И вот что для меня, так сказать, самое такое пронзительно очевидное, СТС, который я более подробно сейчас познакомился лично, это как раз вот тонус, градус этого активизма, который активность может перемещаться в любые институции, в любые предметные области, знания и так далее. Поэтому убийца там, за социальность, за первичность социального или культурного или еще чего-то, это пустое дело.
So basically the punchline then I think I will translate it as follows. what I find in STS, about which I was listening for the first time in my life for the last 4 hours, is the following. It's a certain modus or temper of activism which applies itself to lots of different terrains and spheres of activity, and it's great the way it gets there and infiltrates them, and whether we call them social or cultural, who cares? It's the productive union of STS with different endeavors. I mean, yeah, I can translate at the same time.
Yes, I just wanted to add something. Well, actually, I would not probably agree that it doesn't matter. I would be interested in why it matters and how and for whom. Because if you make a statement that, for example, emerging technologies have social, cultural, ethical, economic implications, that triggers the whole institutional process, if you like, of constructing agencies and training scholars and so on in terms of trying to address this social, cultural, and political. But of course, it's strategic choice, right, at some moment to nominate certain type of technologies for having or having not this kind of implications, I think.
Я не согласился, потому что разного рода применения зависит от того, куда мы применяем СТС. В культуре, в социальных факторах будет разное, но это, наверное, длинный дебат.
I mean, I didn't mean to. I'm not really interested in elevating reflexivity to a major concept or a movement. Or when people ask me, how can I be reflexive? I mean, I'm very worried. I mean, I say, why? Why do you want to be reflexive? It seems to me it's a useful reminder that we mustn't take ourselves too seriously. When we make declarations of the kind that are quite common, that this form of social construction results in these kinds of facts, we have to recall that we are in the process of claiming some kind of facticity for that statement. And it's meant to be a humbling move. It's meant to remind us that we are in the same game which we are trying to describe. And it not because we're in error, but because it might be productive to think differently about that. So I think reflexivity is essential to not just STS, but I'd probably say to philosophy. I mean, it was, to paraphrase Kierkegaard, I don't know if you're a fan of Kierkegaard, but Kierkegaard said something like, if you take reflexivity away from the philosopher, you're just left with a professor.
Но вообще таким словом долго обозначалось просто сознание как таковое в течение нескольких веков, поэтому ум есть, сознание есть, значит уже рефлексия.
So actually, reflexivity was used for many years just to designate consciousness. You have to say it doesn't have your conscious, so it might be that this is not a big innovation. Okay. Let me be reflexive for a bit. Давайте я стану рефлексивным, но попытаюсь говорить медленно по-английски. And I'll start speaking slowly in English. So, when I was listening to two presentations, I liked the fact that Steve called for more ethnography. Go and study. And Lena gave us an example of more ethnography because she was in some high-tech firm talking about how they market things, and she came back with a description which seemed banal, but not to the people who are doing the marketing, and not to me, who is doing the marketing of this university, which I have to sell to, foundations and donors and businessmen. Because she said that what's most important is tellable stories. Tellable stories means the following, in my opinion, and that's what I read in the article, as I remember. It doesn't apply necessarily to hers, but my reality of a tellable story is the following. You have to tell a businessman over a cocktail a punchline, what Trevor calls a pitch, which in 30 seconds describes what the university is and why he has to fund it. Usually it's a he. So, and that's what's called a tellable story. If it's not tellable, basically don't sell it. So this is the essence of marketing, and Elena grasped it in her research, at least this kind of marketing. Now, when I got this, I stayed, looked at myself in reflection, That's what they were first of all. And I immediately started to dislike this whole approach in the sense of this marketing, because I thought, where is this emphasis on marketing, reflexivity, and tellable stories is coming from? And my other point of reference was the summer school on STS, which we ran with Lector this summer. And we brought people from St. Petersburg, we brought some people from Moscow, we had an all-Russia search for people doing STS, but not many people responded. So we had a bunch of, more or less, meeting in between Moscow and St. Petersburg. We locked them all inside one railway engineering hotel, and we started talking to each other. But when we had free time to reflect on our research, the two groups immediately split. Not by city of origin, but the activities. One went to discuss the ethnographies they will be doing, and they were sitting on the river bank. And another one took boats and floated far away to discuss the 11th thesis on Feuerbach, to interpret that with the help of Latour. So basically, we should get Marx and start reading that closely, and it was 4 hours of Talmudic precision, you know, how you get it. And that was high theory. So I asked myself why I ended up in the ethnography group. The explanation which Lector offered me, who was the head of another group, was the following. I mean, you guys basically do what Latour does, basically go, see, sit there, and do a description, and nothing else. And we have a purchase on doing high theory, which is far more explicit, better, well-founded. And the difference, of course, between his position and my position is that Lector has to sell science as a dean of faculty, and I have to sell the university as a fundraiser.
That's a selling.
And if that is somehow what drives you and me to stress the tellable stories, is just because we are in marketing rather than in science, then this reflexive thought I find deeply disturbing. And I still would like to support your claim on the grounds of the increase in knowledge. Because what Vincent does, I find very promising. There's not even one good ethnography of a Russian bank. That's why we don't know what the hell is going on inside there. There's not even one good ethnography of a Russian governmental office. And that's why Putin and Medvedev can swap places in this completely strange musical chairs offering. And everybody thinks this is normal practice. We don't have one good ethnography of a Russian university, unless I write one when I step down from my position. At least about top management rather than about students. And we should be doing that, but when I'm repeating this injunction, what I feel, and this is the marketer through me, or the marketing specialist. So what do you say about this?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's what counts as a good ethnography is quite important here, and it's not good enough to simply go, hang around, and write a description. I mean, I think ethnography should not be producing a realist report of what's actually out there. I mean, one of my favourite anthropologists is Clifford Geertz, and he says that the point of anthropology is to produce accounts of our experience as ethnographers, which will displace the sense of familiarity with which we live our lives. I'm sorry, it's very difficult. In other words, the point of ethnography is not just to say how it really is out there, although that might have some political effect too, but the point is to provide a way of reflecting upon what we take for granted about our own lives. And ethnography has that kind of that kind of dimension to it too. So I'm afraid to say it's quite possible to do ethnography badly, and for this reason you need some very good trainers of ethnography in this new venture. But let me pick up on another part of what you're hinting at here, which is what it is that our audiences might expect of us as STSs. And I am continually surprised by how easy it is to misunderstand what our users or our new audiences might want. And in a way, the Certainty Trough again makes that point, that the expectations and assumptions of the people we might talk to outside of STS are very mysterious, and we continually make mistakes. So I have a small anecdote about this, if you will allow me. A long time ago, I tried to get my group prepared for a meeting with a funding agency, and the funding agency were going to give us some money to do some research, and so it was quite an important meeting. And I asked my group to please wear suits and ties, to really make their PowerPoint slides slick, to have the research centre logo ready on everything like that. And we were going to ban any fancy theoretical talk. In particular, we will not talk about postmodernism or reflexivity. We will give these people a straight, sober, scientific message about the results of our research. And we rehearsed, and the group was pretty fed up. They had to do this, but you know. And the day came, and the delegate came in, and we sat opposite each other and started our presentations. And there was a shifting of feet. You can tell when a presentation is going badly, and they were pretty uncomfortable. And after a little while, the leader of the delegation said, "This is all very well, but haven't you guys heard of postmodernism?" For me, it's a really iconic moment. We'd made just such a classic mistake of imagining what it was that these people wanted. And we had no idea that they had a whole set of assumptions which we could address in a completely different way. And I think that's a really interesting ethnographic problem. How do you ever figure out exactly what it is that your audiences want? They know their assumptions, how you teach them what to want, and so on. So it's all that crossing of borders, which is so important to get on top of as part of the ethnography. Sorry, it's a bit long.
To ask Elena to talk a little bit about her idea of, or, well, not her idea, but I think she mentioned about responsible innovation, because it seemed interesting to me, as it was the first time we'd been speaking about ethics in STS, and I guess if we take the mangle as the way that sort of products are developed, maybe does that not sort of make ethics sort of irrelevant to STS, or how can you account for an ethical STS?
The question, I'm not quite sure I could position myself as being someone in STS who's the best to account for the research on ethics. On the other hand, my take on that was that I was doing an empirical project that was looking at, let me put it this way, the cultural responses to the ethical talk. So you can imagine there are all sorts of interactions that's going on around ethics. When someone is throwing the term ethics in, it's not neutral, it assumes certain sort of consequences and deliberations. And I was particularly interested in how scientists were responding to the ethics policy talk, for instance. And as an ethnographer, I'm interested in describing the situations when ethical is being spoken about, as how particular for example, scientific projects are termed as being ethical or not, and that's where I would start. I would not say that there is, especially I wouldn't begin with saying there is a sort of ethical STS. It's highly debatable as well.
This is when scientific knowledge is used in order to legitimate some dubious projects. I mean, in some cases, when businessmen or politicians ask so-called experts to prepare some reports to help them to get a grant for their project, which is in fact not very scientific. We do have these cases in Russia, and I wonder if you can advise me some readings about it, and what do STS specialists think about this case of abuse of scientific methods?
That question too is
for everyone, for all the reporters.
Well, I think my view is important.
Question in STS as well has been written about that, and it's been discussed a lot. I mean, there's certainly literature. If you're interested, I'm sure everyone would be able to send a list. And the construction of scientific advice, would be probably one of the inroads, and trying to understand how that is being made. Literature about the construction of the boundary between science and non-science.
Well, I mean, you may not need STS to do this project, that's the other thing. It doesn't always need STS, it might just be a more muckraking project that needs to be done, and maybe that's, could be useful as well, maybe informed a bit by some STS concepts. I don't say it always has to be one way, always have to use STS and other approaches. If it's a real scandal, you may not want to do STS. Multinational, Steve knows very well, is a reflexive scholar who's interested in fraud and science. So you turn it into a problem. How do you actually tell whether it counts as irresponsible research? And that could be one way to go. That might be inappropriate if there's a huge amount of agreement. This is a scandal waiting to be unfolded.
I mean, I think the question does have potential for some very interesting kinds of approach, and my first instinct is that you have to give the problem some texture. So it's unethical. It's unethical for whom, and who is trying to pass it off as something other than unethical. Who's advising whom, and why are they taking notice of? What sort of stories and accounts get passed from committee to committee in order that they avoid argument and critique? I mean, those kinds of questions seem to me to open up the question quite well. I mean, I would probably not find satisfactory the starting point that what is being done is unethical. I want to know how the ethical is being constituted and the unethical is being constituted, because I think that gives one a much richer insight into the social and structural dynamics which might be involved there.
Can I add something quickly? Because my co-author Daniel Nayland and myself, we did some research on fair trade, and what appears some neutral terms and highly positive, fair and trade. We just realized how much variety it is in interpreting both what fairness means, what trade means, and how productive these terms, different interpretations, how productive they are for the communities involved in doing fair trade. And this is what that kind of research does. It sort of moves away from the abstract notions and try to see what's going on in terms of interpreting them and using for certain purposes.
Thanks, Ksenia, for the question, which elicited so much response. And it's a good question, but I fear we're entering the level of high mathematics. When we use reflexivity, we talk about ethics, and we forgot about the simple examples of research you all did, which is actually the main contribution of STS, rather than thinking on what it does and thinking on the ethics of what it does or science does. And the last hour and a half was all about thinking of how we relate to business as STSers or how we relate to ethics as STSers. So I'll switch now to Russian in order to give short examples to the audience which never read your books what you're doing. And Елена and Svetlana will control me as two British sociologists and how I describe it, and I will tell you what extent it was adequate. То, что я сказал, что за последние, к несчастью, полчаса мы стали говорить все больше о рефлексивности СТС по отношению к самой себе и по поводу того, этично, неэтично сама наука или СТС применение к науке, и это уже высшая математика по сравнению с тем, что реально делает СТС в большинстве случаев, что является исследованием науки и техники. Эти конкретные примеры сегодня не были предложены, а это именно то, за что платят, что продается и что нужно прежде всего, а не наши размышления о том, что такое СТС. То, что сделал Тревор, и почему он знаменит первоначально, это исследование солнечных нейтрино. Таким образом становится знание о Солнце с помощью громадных установок, как у нас в Боксатском ущелье, так и у них в Монтане. Это привело к тому, что человек, который получил Нобелевку за исследование нейтрино, цитирует Тревора как единственного, кто понял, что действительно делается среди физиков по этому поводу. Нет, среди не физиков, скажем. Вот. Энди, соответственно, знаменит тем, что он сначала, как я говорил, исследовал кварки, потом вышел с профессией, написал, как они конструируются. А его книжка, в которой есть глава про Маркова, который тоже получил Нобелевку за исследование кварков, лучшее описание этих мелких зарядов частичных, с помощью которых конструируется наше знание о квантовом построении физики и Вселенной. Вот. Я не буду долго рассказывать про то, что делал Стив, потому что исследование лаборатории было первым. Но книжки, которые написаны потом, они не менее значимы для понимания того, как функционирует не только наука, но и научный бизнес. Лена про себя рассказывала, понятно, что это исследование маркетинга, где применяется СТС, уже для того, чтобы посмотреть, когда наука выходит и делает то, что сейчас стоит как задача перед, возможно, Сколково, а именно коммерциализация, прежде всего, научного продукта, а не только производство научного продукта. И она занимается именно этими процессами. То, что утром рассказывал вам сам, это все-таки потрясающий сюжет. Ему повезло, что, будучи математиком, он попал в банк, а вышел оттуда социологом, который писал, как же они там настроили все эти деривативы, которые привели к 2008 краку. Когда в 2002 вы еще не слушали, говорили, ну и ладно, через 6 лет пожалею. Эта книжка сейчас появилась в 2011. И так далее, и тому подобное. И то, что мы делали на русском материале, вот отсюда две девушки, которые молчат, движение Попова, наш материал по реформе ЖКХ в Петербурге и Чайковце, это попытка показать, как СТС работает на очевидных гнилых ржавых железках, которые определяют нашу жизнь, хотя мы чаще всего об этом не думаем. Мы не применяли напрямую к науке, но, в общем-то, на самом деле это то, из-за чего СТС работает. Если заканчиваем на серьезные ноте, а не на ноте самоупрощения. Why I said this all in Russian, because I wanted to finish it with a note of complacency and seriousness rather than a note of self-depreciation and inquisitive inquiry of whether we achieved anything as a profession.